Sometimes the biggest political signals aren't in the headlines or the official statements. They're hidden in the moves that on the surface seem to make absolutely no sense at all. Today, we're going to decode one of the strangest political ideas in recent memory by digging into our source material.
So let's just ask it straight up. Why on earth did Donald Trump suddenly want to buy Greenland? I mean, it sounded completely absurd, right? Almost like a late-night talk show joke. But the analysis we're looking at today argues it wasn't a random thought. No, it was a message, a clear symptom of a power structure that was under some serious pressure.
And that's the whole key right there. The source material is basically telling us to stop thinking about this as a policy idea and start thinking about it in terms of psychology. The desire to buy Greenland wasn't about real estate. It was a distress signal, a flare sent up by a leader who felt his control starting to slip. So let's break down exactly what that means. To really get what that signal meant, we have to look at the big picture it came from. The source describes this environment as an architecture of decline, a situation where the very foundations of symbolic power were beginning to crack, way before most of us saw the full picture.
And it really starts with the numbers, with the data. According to polling cited in the source, that public image of strength and vitality was starting to erode. You had nearly half the country believing Donald Trump was too old to lead. Now, when a leader's core myth, their own strength, begins to weaken, that's when you see rivals start to surface.
Now, this is where the analysis connects the dots from the polling data to a much deeper idea. It's not just about the numbers. It's about what the source calls a broken emotional contract. The symbols that once worked, that rallied supporters, were just losing their power to persuade the wider public. And this really shows the larger trend. The source points out that with less than 20% of Americans seeing the country as a shining city on a hill, the main national story itself was losing its power. And think about it. When people stop believing in the big story, they start to stop believing in the storyteller. This is the pressure cooker that sets the stage for everything else.
So, the big question is, how does a leader react when they feel this decline? Well, the source material turns to a classic playbook, Robert Greene's The 48 Laws of Power, to really analyze Donald Trump's behavior. The argument here is that his actions weren't random at all, but were actually predictable and often flawed responses to this feeling of weakness. Okay, let's take a look at a key principle from that book, Law 18. It basically warns that for any leader, building a fortress and isolating yourself is fatal. Power absolutely depends on connection, on information, on alliances. So cutting yourself off, that's like a strategic death sentence.
But here's the thing. According to the source, fear makes a leader do the exact opposite of what they should. It causes them to retreat, to shrink their inner circle, and to, well, build walls. This creates the very isolation that the laws of power tell you is so dangerous.
And look, this isn't just some abstract idea. The source points to really concrete signals of this isolation happening. Key government agencies start having negative favorability, longtime allies begin to pull away and hedge their bets, and the public overwhelmingly rejects more extreme ideas about domestic power. The fortress was being built, brick by brick.
Okay, another classic move for any leader is spectacle, right? Law 37 says to create compelling spectacles. But the analysis here shows how Donald Trump's attempts at this kind backfired. According to the source, when your spectacles, like these lavish, over-the-top parties, become totally detached from what people are actually experiencing, they don't project strength, they project disconnection.
So what happens next? Well, according to the source, you see this two-step pattern start to emerge. First, public trust wears away. And then, the leader starts hedging their bets for the future. The source points to private financial moves, like Donald Trump's purchase of really unstable bonds, as a sign that he was already preparing for a future after power, an aftermath. All right, this is where the story really takes a sharp turn, because the source argues that the real mortal danger to a leader like Donald Trump doesn't come from the opposition you expect, it comes from the allies you don't.
I mean, listen to this. This is the moment everything changes. A Republican congressman goes on the record and says that an invasion of Greenland, as absurd as it sounds, would trigger an immediate impeachment with Republican support. This isn't an attack from the outside. This is a warning shot fired from inside the fortress wall.
And you have to understand, this is a huge deal. Here's why. Power can handle opposition. It's built for it. What it absolutely cannot handle is defection. When your own side starts publicly drawing lines in the sand, it means the system's own immune response is starting to kick in to protect itself.
The source has a name for this move: containment. That impeachment threat wasn't really about protecting the country from an invasion of Greenland. It was about protecting the Republican Party, as an institution, from the unpredictable actions of its own leader. It was an act of pure organizational self-preservation.
So when a threat like that comes from inside your own house, it pushes a leader into what the source calls the desperate phase. And this is the most dangerous part of all. It's not about being in power or out of power, it's about the feeling of that power slipping away in real time.
And there's a really important difference here the source points out. A total collapse, that's one thing. That leads to resignation, to giving up, the fight is over. But a slow, steady decline, that produces something way more volatile: panic. It's the panic of trying to stop the slide that leads to these erratic, desperate moves.
And the theory behind this is actually pretty simple, but it's incredibly powerful. When a leader's words, their symbols, stop persuading people, they start looking for something physical they can control. A piece of territory doesn't vote. A map can't impeach you. Donald Trump's focus, according to the source, shifted from the symbolic to the tangible, from persuasion to geography. And that brings us right back to Greenland.
So in this phase, you start to see a leader trying to just rewrite reality itself. They replace the hard work of persuading people with the simple idea of just acquiring more land. They replace facts with this kind of mythic language about destiny and great threats. And they start to use chaos as a tool, hoping it can force people together where consensus has already failed.
Ultimately, the source's analysis leaves us with this pretty chilling summary. The greatest danger doesn't come from a leader who is unpopular, but secure. It comes from the leader who senses the end is near and decides that the normal rules, the usual restraints, just don't apply to them anymore.
And that brings us right back to where we started. That whole obsession with Greenland. It wasn't a policy. It was a signal of decline, of panic, and of a leader entering the most unpredictable phase of power. And the source leaves us all to ponder that final, critical question. What happens next?